The next best thing that can happen to a game that launched disastrously is that it can see some kind of redemption arc. But that doesn't always happen. Some games like No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk 2077 did see a resurgence and did improve enough over time where it is now in a more than satisfactory state and where it's now garnered more positive sentiments and optics. But then you have your Marvel's Avengers, which went completely downhill and died off in the end. And alongside that, you've got the likes of Redfall, which you can see right here garnered a mixed review score of 56% from 75 critic reviews. And then when it comes to user score, it's sitting at generally unfavorable 3.5 from over 1,000 user ratings. And then on OpenCritic, things don't fare any better with a 57% average critic score, with only 14% of critics recommending the game. So yikes, right? And the general consensus was that there's probably no redeeming this game unless they overhaul the hell out of it. Now, Bethesda and even Xbox have come out and said multiple times to the public that they're not giving up on Redfall and that they're hoping that over time, as they fix the issues and, transform the game or just improve it, they can find a way to make it viable for the long term. So, for example, here's a games industry article from back in September 1st, 2023, where Pete Hines said, responding to the following question, Bethesda's previous release, the Arcane-developed Redfall, didn't receive the warm reception that was expected. How has that changed things internally at Bethesda? And the way Pete responded is that, yes, this game has a rough launch, but we have seen games make a resurgence after a disastrous launch, so, we're going to stick with it. He said right here, we are the same company that has had launches that didn't go the way we wanted, and we don't quit or abandon stuff just because it didn't start right. Likely referring to Fallout 76, which is in a much better state now, I suppose. But, this mentality of it's okay to launch things disastrously because we can make up for it later on and we can improve things later on. That mentality of having that kind of safety net where you're allowed to screw customers at launch before things get better is not a healthy standardization to set. The fact that developers are getting too comfortable with this model is a little disconcerting. He continues, okay, we didn't get the start we wanted, but it's still a fun game. A lot of people would question that claim. The thing about Redfall is, aside from the technical issues, there are many design elements of it that people feel like just makes for a game that's not particularly fun to play, that's kind of drab and just kind of very basic. People see the potential in Redfall, but many shortcomings just really don't allow this to be as fun as Bethesda would like to think it is. And we're going to keep working on it, he said. We're going to do 60 FPS. We're going to get it to be a good game because we know, as a first-party studio, Game Pass lives forever. There will be people 10 years from now who are going to join Game Pass and Redfall will be there, is the bold claim that Pete Hines made. But alas, looking at the player count right now on Steam, the all-time peak is sitting at a mere 1,560 players, and the 24-hour peak as of the recording of this video is just a mere 27 players. Over the last hour, 18 players are checking this game out, and that fluctuates, goes as high as the low double digits to as low as 3-4 players, which is barely enough for a team or not enough for a team. There have been points throughout the game's post-launch period where Redfall didn't have enough Steam players to fill a team of 4, where it was below 4 players playing at the same time, and so those wanting to engage in multiplayer were kind of screwed. And with this game kind of encouraging co-op, that's obviously far from ideal. Here's Forbes reporting something similar with reports that the game is still planning to release the DLC, as that's kind of an obligation they have now. Forbes believes here that Arcane's Redfall has all been but abandoned. Its last update was in June of 2023, a month after its release, and there's been nothing of substance added in the 4 months since, which gave off the perception that Bethesda was moving on from this game, despite having expressed that they want to keep it updated. And the 60 FPS update that was promised hasn't happened either, reads this article. But this article came out on October 5th. We would eventually see that patch release. And keep in mind that the game did launch at just 30 FPS support on Xbox, with the promise of 60 FPS performance mode being added via a game update at a later date, which was far from ideal, made worse by the fact that the 30 FPS wasn't even a stable 30 FPS. Performance issues were among the greatest flaws that people have highlighted of this title. And this is a first-person shooter we're talking about, so a smooth gameplay is paramount to the gameplay experience, and that's just unfortunately something that Redfall didn't offer. Now, on October 6th, Arcane would finally release their 60 FPS mode for Xbox Series X and S. And we got details right here on not just the frame rate update and the addition of performance mode, but also some of the improvements that they made. There's an article from Rock Paper Shotgun whose headline reads, Redfall second major patch continues to make its open world more alive with vampires. Scrolling down here, we have specific details on what exactly has been improved or updated. The update increases the open world enemy population and mission encounter balancing. It adds unique open world enemy encounters to certain areas. It also adds new behaviors to enemy AI and increases the opportunities for stealth takedowns. On the performance side of things, stability has allegedly been improved across a wide range of hardware configurations, alongside fixes for memory crashes, performance improvements made to abilities and weapons, and a fix for a graphical corruption issue connected to AMD GPUs. And then beyond that, there have been improvements made to screen narration, aim assist, and visibility improvements for enemies in low light. These are very much fixes that get Redfall closer to the state that it should have been at launch. Now, those improvements, while acknowledged, they've been reported to not be the redemption story we were hoping for. This is an article from Eurogamer. While the 60 FPS patch did improve performance and it did add 60 FPS performance for Xbox that is stable enough, it ultimately doesn't do much to get people back into the game. It's kind of a case of not only too little too late, but just not enough in terms of content additions to make people curious about the game again. Before Eurogamer reports on the improvements, they do highlight some of the pre-launch and post-launch issues that plague the game, starting with marketing and how they showed all Redfall gameplay at 60 frames per second with relatively unambitious visuals, yet the final game targeted 30 FPS on consoles. Yeah, which is definitely a marketing failure and somewhat of a deception. While yes, the game can run at 60 FPS on PC, with it being marketed on Xbox, you have to at least showcase what that legitimately looks like playing on Xbox, but they obviously showed the best version of the game instead of the most realistic version. Beyond that, Eurogamer highlights that the title didn't ship in tip-top shape, obvious graphical problems, texture loading issues. Redfall had issues loading in high-resolution textures, which was most obvious with decal-type textures. Sometimes it could take as long as 18 seconds to load in textures. This has now been completely fixed, so that's good. Some of the game's textures are still a touch low resolution, though, just like the launch version of the game. So some asset issues still remain not fully fixed, but those 18 seconds long loading in of textures, stuff like that, the more severe stuff has been fixed by this patch. Then there's discussions about snags with shadow quality. When you approach them, they looked very odd, constantly flickering and aliasing. And because the game had a dynamic time of day system with shadow maps updating their position every single frame, the shadows looked awful even when the camera position was kept static. Apparently, the patch did completely or comprehensively fix this issue. There are still some shadow issues here and there. New shadows aren't exceptional by any means, but Redfall is now basically on par with expectations for a modern title. Again, we're not talking leaps and bounds here. We're talking about basic things that should have been in place at launch that are finally now here. And then from there, we have lighting oddities that unfortunately haven't been addressed as much as other issues. So with the launch of the game, people experienced shadow pop-in, which could occur at uncomfortably close range and occasionally featured very odd-looking lighting setups that didn't really correspond with reality. Unfortunately, these issues are still mostly present. There's dim-looking light sources that seemingly cast light as bright as the sun, accompanied by pop-in. 5 months on, Redfall is still littered with bizarre lighting issues and bugs, so still far from perfect. It's very much taking a while. I mean, this is the first patch in months, and still many of the issues are still not addressed, even if some things have been improved. But even if all of the graphical issues are fixed, that's not going to address the fact that the game's overall aesthetic and visuals are just not great. They do look sort of last-gen-ish, especially indoors, and the storyboard-style cutscene and robotic dialogue scenes showcase questionable production values. Again, that stuff just really requires a major overhaul, and developers really sitting down and hunkering down to improve the visuals of this game. And I don't foresee that investment being worth it because this game really looks like it's on its way out. All right, so that finally brings us to performance. You now got quality and performance modes targeting 30 FPS and 60 FPS respectively. All basic visual settings are more or less a match for both modes, which is interesting. So you're not going to be losing out on a whole lot of graphical details by going performance mode, so might as well stick to that, including performance sapping settings like shadow resolution, foliage density, and draw distance. All of that is pretty much a close match between the two modes. They look remarkably similar at a glance. The key here is upsampling. The performance mode renders at 1080p with some form of upscaling, taking it to an effective, essentially 4K resolution, whereas a quality mode is essentially full 4K, but the differences are negligible enough where performance mode will be just fine, as no major graphic settings have been turned down. A quality mode on both consoles now operates at a locked 30 FPS with no frame rate issues as far as I can tell. So whereas before it was a not so smooth 30 FPS, now at least it is a locked 30 FPS, so performance mode for quality mode has been improved. It's a big improvement from the launch release, which suffered from frame time hiccups during open world traversal and could exhibit some issues with a screen full of alpha. Obviously far from ideal in a first-person shooter that requires just fast reactions and reflexes and responsiveness from the game. And then performance mode manages to hit 60 FPS quite consistently. Most of the time you're getting a flat 60 FPS readout, though at times, like during traversal, stutter does reappear, though in less pronounced form than on the launch release. So I guess negligible enough where it's not a huge deal. A couple of dips in combat during multiplayer play here and there, not perfect, but a satisfactory turnout on the whole. Now, if a game does still maintain some long-term legs despite a disastrous launch, and there's a chance for redemption, usually a patch like this will see, some kind of spike in player numbers, but despite the release of that update and patch, the concurrent player numbers really did not change much at all. I mean, you can see right here, from June to July, August, September, from 56 average players to 33 to 22 to 15, 5 more players are playing now on average compared to last month. But that's a negligible difference. 5 more people decided to check this game out on average because of this patch that makes some, noticeable enough improvements. Like, nobody cares about this game is the unfortunate thing. People aren't even looking for a redemption for this game because they've all kind of moved on. Because the idea of this game and the impression that it made all kind of led to a point where there's just this mass disinterest towards Redfall, especially in a landscape where, there's so many amazing games coming out this year that Redfall is the last thing on people's minds right now. 2023 has been an epic year for high-quality releases. From Baldur's Gate to Spider-Man to Zelda to, Resident Evil 4 Remake to, I could sit here, Mario Wonders, I could sit here and list them all out, but it would take a while. Like, competing with that, it's like Redfall is not even a blip on the radar. And in general, not every game can see a redemption arc. In fact, those are rarer than the games that end up falling off to the wayside, which is what Forbes leaves here. Paul Tassi here, he posted this article whose headline reads, "There'll be no Redfall redemption arc for Xbox." And that's kind of the opinion I share as well. I don't foresee a path for this game to see some kind of major comeback a la, Fallout 76, No Man's Sky, and Cyberpunk 2077. Now, apparently there are some developers within Bethesda who are hoping that they can stick with Redfall in the hopes that over the long term, it can eventually see some kind of redemption. That's according to a report from games journalist Jess Corden, who said the following about the concept of a redemption arc. "I spoke to some Bethesda people, and well, I say I spoke to, but I eavesdropped on their conversation at the Not E3 events in LA this year, and they were talking about sticking with the game. Yeah, they were talking about sticking with the game for years, and, they want to give it a redemption arc and stuff like that. Now, it's worth noting that this isn't confirmation that Bethesda and Microsoft and Xbox are planning to stick with Redfall for the long term. This is just developers talking and hoping. Jess clarified that this is more aspirational than something that is definitely greenlit and happening. It's just devs wanting to fix their work. But I'll be honest, from a business standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense to keep sticking with Redfall. Its player base right now is so abysmal despite the release of this new update that did add some substantial improvements. The player base is still so abysmal that I don't foresee this as a venture with any sort of hope whatsoever. Again, they'd have to overhaul it from top to bottom or do like No Man's Sky scale updates and hope that they can make that investment back for this to be a viable path for Redfall. But I think the smartest thing to do right now is just to cut your losses and move onwards, because I don't think it has the foundation to make that kind of recovery unless they put, the full force of Arcane behind it. And it's not just on Steam where Redfall is not doing particularly well despite the release of this patch and update. The update didn't move the needle at all. A couple weeks after the patch hit, Redfall is not in Xbox's top 50 most played games, despite being on Game Pass, and then its Steam peaks are currently around 40 players total. Its lows, 7 players. This is identical to before the patch arrived. And then beyond that, the patch itself, while some substantial improvements have been made in visuals and performance, the game itself still just remains, kind of meh. Here's a report from Paul Tassi. I went back and played the game after the patch. Shooting was just mildly better, still not good. Density was increased, but all that did was made me burn poorly distributed resources. Enemy AI was, I saw a soldier trying to shoot a vampire on a roof with a shotgun and miss for about 5 full minutes. The bones here are rotten, and that's what I mean by the foundation just isn't there for this to see some kind of revival. I mean, even before the game came out, the developers within Arcane knew that this was not going to go down well, according to this Jason Schreier report from June 1st, 2023, where it was reported that the mediocre reception was no big surprise to Redfall developers. And beyond that, after the Microsoft acquisition of ZeniMax, which encompasses Arcane as well, they were hoping that this game would get canceled by Microsoft. The acquisition gave some staff at Arcane hope that Microsoft might cancel Redfall, or better yet, let them reboot it as a single-player game, according to sources familiar with the production. Instead, Microsoft maintained a hands-off approach, which is something that Phil Spencer did express regret about when speaking to Kinda Funny about Redfall's bad reviews, and he spoke about this game because Redfall is an Xbox first-party exclusive launch after Microsoft's acquisition of ZeniMax, and it's just a bad look for Xbox, releasing a game like this when their first-party output is still not quite as strong as Nintendo's and PlayStation. So he said, we didn't do a good job early on of engaging with Arcane Austin to really help them understand what it meant to be a part of Xbox. He said, we should have been there for them, for the team earlier. That's on us. We were too late to help. I take that as learning, as painful as it is. At the very least, Phil Spencer is taking some responsibility and, learning from this and seeing how processes can be improved. Though it seems as though Xbox is being proactive about their organization and how they manage things now that Bethesda and ZeniMax are part of Xbox now, and now with the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Here's a report that reads, big Xbox shakeup might avoid another Redfall debacle. So, first of all, Pete Hines has left Bethesda. After 24 years, I've decided my time at Bethesda Softworks has come to an end. I'm retiring and will begin an exciting new chapter of my life, exploring interests and passions, donating my time where I can, and taking more time to enjoy life. I wish him the best on that front. So yeah, Pete Hines is out, but beyond that, within Microsoft and Xbox itself, The Verge reports here that there's been this huge reorganization, especially on the gaming department. Microsoft is promoting Matt Booty to president of game content and studios. Sarah Bond is now Xbox president, overseeing all Xbox platform and hardware work. Chief Marketing Officer Chris Capocella is stepping down after 32 years at Microsoft, making way for, Takashi Numoto. And then here is Phil Spencer, who is Microsoft Gaming CEO, stating that ZeniMax will continue to operate as a limited integration entity led by Jamie Letter, president and CEO, reporting to Matt. So it looks like there's now a tighter integration between ZeniMax and Microsoft, where ZeniMax will have to report to Microsoft more. I think Microsoft is going to keep a closer eye on their projects. And one of the speculations is that Booty's expanded role should help Microsoft Gaming avoid scenarios like Redfall in the future, with Microsoft clearly focusing on better collaboration between the teams it acquired with the ZeniMax Bethesda acquisition. So the fact that Microsoft is adapting, especially after what happened with Redfall, might be a good sign. Hopefully it's a good balance of managing what needs to be managed and overseeing what needs to be overseen, but not coming in too hard and disrupting the creativity of the developers and letting too much corporate influence seep in. Hopefully there's a right balance there, where developers still feel autonomous in their creativity, but Microsoft can step in when they see mismanagement and be like, hey, we should course correct in this direction or that direction, like they maybe could have done with Redfall before its downfall. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is kind of where we're at, and this kind of gives you a full picture of where Redfall currently stands. I really don't think Microsoft should continue pursuing this. I don't see anyone really being like, oh, I hope they save Redfall. Everyone's kind of like, just move on. Like, I don't know. This is not a game that compel people enough, and it did not launch strong enough or make enough of an impression for people to feel like it's worth saving. And, with this being a new IP, it's even harder to save. Like Fallout 76, it's still Fallout. You know what I mean? People still play it because it's Fallout. With Redfall, it being a new IP, it had to knock it out of the park. And it coming out the way it did, and it garnering little to no attention despite, significant update and all these things, I don't foresee this game really having long legs. I don't foresee this game being worth the investment. I don't foresee this game really living for the long term. So that's my prediction, but that's just one man's take. Maybe they'll surprise me and somehow this game will miraculously make a comeback. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I just don't see it happening. But that's my take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the status of Redfall, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.